Hi, I'm Eric Brink, and this is my research proposal. It's called Virtually Learning, or Learning with Students in Their Online World. Essentially, students more and more are living their lives in an online world through Facebook, Instagram, even Twitter. And as a result, the thinking is that in education, we also need to take a look at whether it is beneficial for us to also be using these spaces in order to connect with students and to make their education more meaningful to them. What we'll need to do is take a look at what is there up to this point. So one of the studies is Kavunya, who studied if using social media platforms enhances learning. So what he did was in an undergraduate course, he had them set up in a Google Learning community where students were told to wrestle with problems and to work collaboratively. He found that learning was greatly enhanced. Which is excellent. He also discovered that 21st learning skills were enhanced as students were working with each other using collaboration and creativity in order to achieve the goals that were set before them. So he found that this was very beneficial. Another study would be Normandin, Norburn, and Ryberg, which looked at the impact of blogs on education. So similar to Kavunya. They used blogs specifically designed for mobile technologies. They called them moblogs. And their finding is they worked well for group collaboration. So group members who had a little bit of social anxiety and normally would not have participated to a much greater extent simply because of the lack of face-to-face content. The other thing that they found was students greatly appreciated the idea of that there was instant peer or instructor feedback. So while they are struggling with something using the blog or using something in their course, they would post on their blog and they could get an answer instantly from either an instructor who was on the site or from a peer who has already studied that. So this was the context-dependent feedback. Another study was Balrani, Patel, and Sheridan, and what they took a look at was whether the students were okay with the idea of social media in classrooms. So one of the things that they found, not too surprisingly, is that privacy was a concern. And they found that 50% of students were a little unwilling to integrate social media into classrooms because they were a little bit unwilling to connect their personal or private accounts with a professor, to friend the professor in Facebook or something, or in their Twitter account, through concerns of the content that they may have on their site, or that it was just not quite an appropriate response. What they did find is if the social media interaction in the course is limited, such as in a Facebook group, at which you are not required to friend anybody, it's a public group, then support was greatly increased to being well over 80%. And so students were definitely okay with it. Another one was Coleman, which took a look at what barriers are keeping teachers from integrating tech into classrooms. Essentially, this would be very similar to my study, except her study did not deal with integrating of social media, simply integrating technology. So beginning with the premise that this is a valuable benefit to education, she's taking a look at, well, why is it that teachers are not integrating it? So the things that she found was that access to technology was not always present. So she did not always get access to a computer lab, they did not have access to mobile technology. But another one of the findings was that there was a lack of extended professional development. So essentially what was happening, the teachers were given access to technology and they were shown how to use it in a PD session on a day. But then after that, they were simply left on their own to figure it out and try to find a way to connect it into their classroom. Which this is generally not a bad model for professional development. However, when it is technology and there is an added component of a lack of technical knowledge, what often happens is the tech is simply dropped by the wayside. Essentially, this is the TPAC model of successful tech integration. The teachers need to know the technology, they need to know their content, and then they need to know how to teach using the tech. What was generally happened was teachers were not able to have all three parts. They were not taught how to teach with it. That was left up to the teacher who was struggling just trying to understand the piece of technology. Another study was Noel, and this was studying issues that arose from the use of virtual spaces by interviewing teachers in a secondary school in Canada. What they found was that there was a number of restrictive policies from school boards, so the administrators were getting in the way. And so what was happening with this is the school boards had things such as no mobile technologies, no access to social media accounts, whether that is personal or private, or personal or professional accounts. And so what happened was a number of teachers chose to live in sin and would connect their professional account anyways. There's also just a lack of knowledge. So some teachers just did not know how to use the social media effectively, definitely not as much as the students did. So this was some of the issues that arose. The gap, or where my research will be focusing in on, there is information that talks about the benefits of using social media in education. And there are some studies that deal with the barriers to tech integration. There is little that has been done on what the barriers that are keeping educators from interacting with students and learning with students in virtual spaces. And this is where my research falls. The research questions that are guiding the research is, the first is, what barriers do teachers identify as keeping them from using social media in education? So this would of course get also to what are the teachers' perceptions of social media in education, because they would identify that as a barrier. The other question would be, what resources exist to support educators in the integration of virtual spaces, and therefore what resources need to exist? The context of the study, or where I'll be working with the Independent Christian School Societies in Ontario. This is an organization called the Ontario Alliance of Christian Schools. There's about 14,000 students and about 650 teachers in about 80 schools throughout Ontario, with a couple outliers in Alberta and Prince Edward Island. I'm realistically hoping for 500 study participants all the way from K to 12. Realistically, 4 to 12, because prior to grade 4, a few students have a social media account. Anyways, I do know a number of principals and teachers throughout the system, and if this is presented as an info gathering for a convention presentation at the yearly convention of this organization, I realistically feel that my number for 500 study participants is valid. The students that I'll be dealing with, well, the students of the teachers I will be dealing with anyways, the students are generally religious. They are relatively affluent from their families because they can afford the tuition. It is important to note that this is independent schools based on religion rather than a private school based on purchasing a quote-unquote premium education, such as a Ridley College or an Appleby College. So while some of the parents are extremely wealthy, many of them are simply scraping by in order to send their kids to the school because of religious beliefs. The teachers who will be actually filling out the surveys, they will range in age and technical ability from brand new right out of school to having taught for 45 years. And technical ability will probably correlate to that in some manner. Culturally, many of them are still Dutch. The origins of the Christian School Society is from the Dutch Reformed movement, but there are much fewer than there used to be. There are some minorities, but mostly are Caucasian and then obviously of European. The majority of the teachers will be elementary. Simply through demographics, there are more elementary schools than there are secondary schools. But as my focus is secondary, as a secondary school teacher, I feel that I will still get a sufficient number of secondary school teachers filling out this survey. The methodology is a survey. Generally, it will begin with basic demographic questions such as school, the age of the participant, the grade range, junior, intermediate, senior, the level of perceived technical ability. This will allow me to sort the data later to allow for more impact of the research. I'll be able to look at what are the issues, the barriers for a junior teacher or intermediate teacher or a senior teacher. I'll also be getting a look at the opinions on the use of social media. I'll be identifying the barriers that the teachers perceive as keeping them from social media. What support is currently in place to support them through PD or through access, and what is needed to help with the integration moving forward. The timeline is I'm going to have the survey developed before the organization's convention, which is in October. This will allow for a presentation on the use of virtual spaces in education. It'll also allow me to connect with principals to get them on board, and also allows for people to complete the survey at the convention using iPads or computer stations. Over the next few months, the survey will continue to be filled out using internet and email. The survey will close after 2 months or 3 months, depending on how long I need it to run. And then it'll be the analysis, the information. So over the next few months, data will be analyzed, conclusions drawn, and articles written for spring publication, principals conferences, and a presentation at the following October convention. The survey results, most of the demographic data, like I said, will be multiple choice that allows for sorting. There'll be content analysis, which will be used to determine the respondents' input, and thematic analysis looking for trends across respondents. The significance is readily apparent. If you accept, as many of the studies are saying, that the connecting with students in virtual spaces is important to their education, then it is important to identify what barriers are keeping that from happening. Once we have identified the barriers, we can look at what are some areas of need, and then we can develop some strategies in order to better serve those needs. So whether that is enhanced professional development, or whether that is simply greater access to technology, these are just things that we would need to take a look at. That is the research proposal. Thanks for listening.